computer. Yeah, now if Anzi or Yushan, you want to record, you can send me a request right now, please, and I'll approve. Okay, see, approve, Yuhan, approve. Okay, that's great. Oh, okay, and okay, Bella is there. That's good. Bella, what are your, just in terms of agenda, what are your thoughts in terms of how much time you could or might like to have?
I think 5 minutes would be enough for me to just present on the topic, and then if anyone has questions, um, that would work.
Okay, that's great. See if we have anyone else. Anzi, do you want to start off, or you want to let Bella finish what she has?
I can do it at the end because I can do my presentation like from 10 minutes to 30 minutes, depending on how others do it.
Okay, now that's good because we just don't know. So she has that brief presentation. Bella, why don't you lead off, and that would be great, please.
Okay, sounds good. Sorry, I'm just plugging in my computer here. But so I, in my paper, am addressing the how so I'm kind of building off of what was discussed in New Political Culture about how we're shifting away from class-based and clientelism and towards
No,
more.
actually, so let me stop just 1 second. Maybe I shouldn't have to, but I think I may have sent this in a way that it hasn't reached Cary Wu properly. So let me try that again for forwarding that. Sorry, just to make sure we don't lose him. And I'll just take out Wanzi Chen. I'll take out Yushan. This will just go to Cary Wu. This is Cary Wu. And I'll send it in a different way to Cary Wu here. Cary Wu should be Gmail. And this is also UC. Okay. So then that goes to. Okay. Apologies, Bella. Okay, go ahead.
No worries. It gave me a second to get my computer all set up, so we're good. Yeah, so in this class, we've talked about how the spread of things like egalitarian ideals, entrepreneurship, bohemia, cosmopolitanism, and the new political culture have acted as contributing factors to the social and economic development of cities in an ever more globalized world. So my paper is zeroing in on one of the factors of the new political culture, which is, new political culture specifically mentioned gay rights as one of the contributing factors in this shift among politicians away from clientelism and class distinctions in driving their political perspectives and alignment. So I use essentially I'm building off of scholarship pertaining to US-Russia relations and the gendered power dynamics involved in shaping that throughout history, and Taiwan-China relations, and how that has evolved from gendered power dynamics in these relationships, which is not new. That's been around for a long history that I address in the paper, to modern day, where very recently, in the past 20 years or so, we've seen the use of queer politics and queer rights as sort of a benchmark among many Western countries of civilization. And so we've shifted away from historically when the US would try and portray itself for example, as a very masculine and therefore strong country, specifically in relation to East Asia, the Middle East, and South Asia. Now we're seeing this shift where, or at least during the Obama administration in particular, there was and I think New Political Culture addressed addressed a little bit early on than this, but in the in the Obama administration, there's specifically a shift in U.S. state performance towards presenting itself as this leader in terms of its human rights record, specifically with queer rights and institutionalized rights therein, such as legalizing gay marriage, as representative of the U.S. being a world leader on this issue, and compelling other countries to follow suit. So it set this up in a way that that was specifically oppositional to the way Russia presented queer rights in its country at the time. And then what we saw is Taiwan, in an effort, or at least in part, to expand its diplomatic space as an unrecognized state, it started incorporating a lot more institutionalized queer rights in its framework. And now we see a lot of people both in Taiwan's government and then also Taiwanese individuals and in their NGO spaces discussing the support of queer rights, not only as a sort of individual ideal that they hold, but one that's irrevocably tied to their political identity as a Taiwanese person. And there's lots of discussion around how this is specifically tied to Taiwan's lack of recognition as an official state. And so lack of recognition as like a queer person and having institutionalized rights associated with that has sort of contributed to the bonding of those two identities, political and personal. And so what I'm aiming to do in this paper is to essentially build off of what was addressed in New Political Culture to discuss how I think that that this issue of queer rights politics should be considered a really pivotal point in current in driving the current world order, because it's become such a major factor in the way states present themselves. And although historically gendered power dynamics have been a major factor, now this shift towards institutionalized queer rights being representative of a state's identity and how it presents itself to the world and situates itself in terms of power and civilization based on its human rights record relative to other oppositional forces, so specifically US, Russia, Taiwan, China, and then Taiwan trying to situate itself as an ally with the US, is I think going to be a more it's going to become an ever more influential factor in developing world order. And I think that something that needs to be studied more, which this paper doesn't fully address, but I would hope to get into in the future, is more of the shift that we're seeing in the current US administration towards pulling back US emphasis on queer rights as a central component of its human rights record and how it wants to present itself diplomatically to the world to get other countries to follow suit, and what the implications are of this volatility, because having queer rights be such a benchmark at all is a pretty recent thing, shifting from those gendered power dynamics towards queer politics specifically. That's more of a past 20 years sort of thing. And so we're seeing how volatile different countries' stances on this actually are. And so I'm curious to see how Taiwan will respond, given that it's become such a fundamental factor in Taiwan's identity formation. So I know that was sort of all over the place. I'm addressing a lot of different sides of this issue, but I welcome any questions that anyone has based on
that. Clear as well presented, but comments, questions? Just calling Cary Wu in the background here. Silence.
Hey, Cary.
Hi there, Cary. We are connected on Zoom, if that would be comfortable for you.
Yes, I'm just waiting for the link. Did you send out the link?
Yes, I sent it twice, but I did have an error message with the first. So the second one I sent to your two emails, a Gmail and another one at your university. You don't have anything now?
I didn't. Yeah, I
Let me
didn't receive anything.
let me look again which email I sent it from, because if I send it from the university, that can go more slowly.
I just sent you an email. You can just reply that email, then I will receive the link. But I don't see any.
Okay, no, I sent it through the university, and the university from here is often slow. Now I'm using my Mac email, and that should be almost immediate.
Okay. Yeah.
See anything now?
Oh, yeah. Now I see the link. Okay, I'll do it now.
Okay, very good. Thank you much.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, folks, but that was the university is not quite up to the high tech of the world. Okay. Quick comments. Maybe bring in a little more explicitly the dynamic of conflict, especially with Trump, but the same thing with Putin. I mean, Putin used this very visibly and symbolically and ideologically to attack the West and to attack Ukraine, and that is done so throughout the war with the Ukrainians. There's been all kinds of social media showing Western leaders as being gay, irresponsible, drunken, on drugs, and sort of not following proper middle class established norms. And that we mentioned the pussy girls in Moscow were strong enough in violating those norms that it had a huge amount of support, apparently, in favor of backing of Putin. So in that sense, that dynamic is certainly worthwhile. And so and then of course the election of Trump is, almost 50-50. So it's not just one or the other. And of course, normally on these things, we have a normal distribution, and these two political leaders have both moved apart further than the average Americans. But nevertheless, there's some people who are at these polls as well. So and then Trump clearly has now in policy starting quite vigorous and forceful policies with NIH, gender labeling being totally removed from all the data, et cetera. So that kind of thing is good to feature. Well, I'll mention quickly as well that when Richard Florida initially introduced gays, he did not say it's a cause. For him, it was an indicator, sort of like a canary, a touchstone, not a causal dynamic, but an indicator of other processes which were more focused on tolerance, diversity, looking for new ideas, and the book was The Rise of the Creative Class. So that was his kind of take on this. Whereas now it has become, as you've described now, much more literal in its own terms, and that both, but I'd say both, but in a sense you can make the stronger argument as well as the narrower one in using two definitions of, or two perspectives, both the indicator or the more general dynamic in its own right. Anything else anyone else wants to add, or question from you?
Sorry, could you remind me the name of the author you just mentioned who used it as an indicator of tolerance and diversity being used?
Richard Florida, like the state.
Okay.
And there's a chapter by him laying this out very explicitly in the book, The City is an Entertainment Machine. And I think it's on the reading list. Then I have a chapter which is refuting the way that they specifically analyzed it. So it's not what I did in no way challenges what you said here, but it was the specific methodological way of doing it by Florida, which was to use all of the arts jobs as being an indicator of bohemia. And so then they brought in gays, and the gay measure itself was essentially statistically spurious. It was wrong. The driver was education, was much more the issue. So that's that. But that, in a sense, that was ancient history from terms of what you're talking about. Okay.
Sure, thank you.
I see that we have Cary Wu. Are you with us now?
Hey, Terry. Hey, everyone. Yes,
Okay.
can you hear me okay?
Yes, indeed. That's splendid. Well,
That's great. Yeah.
I will say you almost need no introduction, but you would be welcome to say anything else about your background leading into this. Please take it as you like. We've circulated your paper on China. You've been working on trust in China, in the Asian countries of the world, and internationally for years. And we've been emailing and for many parts of that. So please lead off. Welcome. It's delighted to have you involved.
Right. Yeah. Thank you, Terry, for having me. So just to introduce myself, I started to work with Terry almost like more than 10 years ago. The first year, we thinking about is about associational life, social activities in urban places, and how that drive urban growth and social relationship. So that's a key part of why I'm over the years, why I'm spending a lot of time researching about social trust as an indicator of people relationship, is because of Terry. So he led me into research about social relationship and how that matters, right? In terms of social relationship, in terms of cultural factors that shaping social outcomes. So the key focus for me for now is still on trust. And then I do social trust, that people trust in each other, and also people's trust in political institutions. Right? So today what I'm gonna do a little presentation will be on social trust. So why people trusting each other, which is part of the two conceptualizations. One is Putnam's idea about social trust. His idea is conceptualizing social trust as a form of social capital, right? So for example, at the place level, when the communities where people are more trusting each other, or at country level, when citizens are more trusting each other, then that lead to a lot of good outcomes for example, better quality of government, better democracy, better economic growth, and better social cohesion, right? So that's at the place level. More trust lead to better kind of like a place level public good. And at individual level, we can also think about just people, right? Do you think people can be trusted? And at individual level, when a lot of evidence showing that when people are more trusting each other, that also predict a lot of outcome, right? For example, the first kind of early research is from Chicago, James Coleman, right? When he talks about social capital, when he talks about trust is at school setting, right? So one key question he had in his educational report is trying to figure out why Black Americans are more likely to drop out from school, high school, right? So one key factor he identified is about trust. So he mentioned that when Black Americans, when they are more trusting in classmates, when they have more trust in teachers and the fellow students, then they are much likely to not to drop out from school, right? So you probably have read the famous article that social capital in the creation of human capital, right? The core idea in that article is thinking about human capital. When we think about human capital, is the skills, education, and all those like human skills, right? People through learning, for example, education, that human capital, labor, money, all those could be part of the human capital. Social capital could be social relationship, people trusting each other, or people join in organizations, right? So in that article, the idea is that when students, for example, have more trust and then more likely to join student organization, and they are better able to get better return from human capital, right? So for example, us going to school, when students in university, they trusting their teachers, trusting their fellow students, and then they are very active in student organizations, then those type of students are much more likely to get better outcome in terms of educational performance, in terms of returning to schooling or to university, right? So in general, there are like two lines of research thinking about trust as part of social capital, but also on its own, right? When people trusting each other. So now my research also has a lot to do with like how trust is associated with people's health, for example. A lot of evidence showing that when people are trusting, they tend to have better health, right? So they drink less, they spend more time with friends, right? Even if they drink with friends. So they have more social support, better emotional kind of like health. And also when people trusting, for example, they sleep better, they exercise more, right? So a lot of mechanism linking how like being trusting is good for social outcome at both individual level and also at the place community level, right? So when link back to Cary at the beginning mentioned about at the city level, the tolerance and diversity, right? So that's also linked to a lot of people trusting each other. When people trusting each other, mean they're more tolerant, right? In the city, urban environment, higher tolerance lead to better economic growth, better ideas. People are more like social relationship, more cohesive. People are more supporting each other. And a big line of literature suggesting how social factors turning into urban growth, right? So just a little background about social trust. And in survey research, when we just be more very specific, in survey research, we tend to measure social trust in terms of, do you think, there's a standard measure, do you think most people can be trusted? So if you look at the General Social Survey, the American General Social Survey, since 1972, the first survey was conducted. There's a question asking about whether most people can be trusted. So in the US, there's a huge decline in terms of people trusting each other, right? So that's Putnam's kind of like patent in 1993 or not, even early 1990. The first article I think he published about trust is that, or even the Bowling Alone, right? Many of you probably have read about his book, that Bowling Alone, that probably made him famous as a researcher for part of the social capital. So the key pattern he identified in that book is about declining social trust among Americans, decline associational life, but also decline in social trust, right? Americans have become less and less trust in each other, right? And then we mentioned because trust matters, so the decline of trust lead to a lot of negative perception about the change in society, right? So there are a lot of talk about the crisis of trust and then the crisis of democracy, right? Because trust is critical for democracy. That's also part of the Putnam's book, in his early book about Italy, right? So making democracy work. In that book, Putnam outlined the key idea that in Italy, the differences between the South and North, the differences in trust in social capital can help explain the differences in quality of the government and also the differences or the gap in economic growth, right? So that, going back to that, the trust, how trust matters. So in survey, I mentioned is people used very simple item to try to capture trust is, do you think most people can be trusted? Right. So in the US, for example, 1972, probably 60% of Americans would say most people can be trusted. Today in the US, only 30%, about 30% people, Americans would say most people can be trusted. You can see this almost like a huge decline over the years. So for the article I just published in Asian survey, I focus on China. In Chinese context, like how there are three debates. One is how trustful are Chinese people, right? So from Western perspective, the lot of argument is about that people in China should be not trusting each other. Trust should be low in China, right? So for example, Max Weber, I think in his book he argued that because Chinese people have close in-group relationship, they have more trust in family members, in people they know, right? So then he argued that because the in-group trust lead to lower out-group trust, meaning that Chinese or Asian society, not just Chinese, but many people in East Asia especially, people tend to have lower trust in people they don't know, but they have higher trust in people they do know, like family members, friends, right? And he argued, Max Weber argued that that's the reason why capitalism did not emerge in China, right? So the argument in his book is that the trusting in other people is critical to the development of capitalism, right? So capitalism meaning that when we have trust in other people, then we can, rely on talent that we don't know, right? So in China, there's only small family business. The reason is that because they don't trust people from out group. They only trust people in group. So that's kind of like argument he made about in China, trust should be lower. And then Fukuyama, another political scientist from Stanford, kind of followed this idea, arguing that like why there are only small companies in China, and you don't see like bigger companies like Amazon, Google, right, Nvidia, those big companies in China, because of people have lower trust in people they don't know, but have high trust only in family members and friends that they know. So this is argument about trust in China should be low. But from survey evidence, especially in recent decades, there are more and more survey data have been collected in China. And all those data suggest that if you ask Chinese people, do you think people can be trusted? Most Chinese will say, like even today, almost 60%, double in terms of percentage, in terms of level, double Americans. 60% of Chinese would say most people can be trusted. So this is the first debate about the level debate about whether trust is low in China or high in China, right? So theoretically, people think trust should be low, but then empirically from the survey data, a lot of data suggests that Chinese people do trust in each other. The second debate I want to mention just quickly is the crisis debate. The argument about the change in trust, right? So a lot of argument about modernization or the transition from, for example, rural society to urban modernized society. How the modernization process change people's trusting in each other. There's also a debate. One argument is that modernization lead to lower trust, right? Because the breakdown of social norms and the breakdown of the social cohesion, right? Because, for example, from close-knit rural community to urban center, right? So if you read Zimmel's research about urban strangers, right? The argument is about, okay, as urban city grow, people, they don't know each other, they came together and they don't trust each other because they don't know each other, right? And then they lead to a lot of like social problems, conflicts and all that, and that lead to lower trust among people, right? So that's one kind of argument. Another line of argument is that modernization lead to more trust in each other. The argument is that when people become modernized, become more civilized, become more educated, and become like have higher income, they become more powerful in terms of controlling risk, how to like treat each other, and become smarter in terms of like when they more understand about the need to rely on each other to build a better society, right? So the civilization and the people better educated lead to people more trusting, more tolerant, more trusting in each other, right? So that's the crisis debate. And in China, there's also like parallel debate, thinking about over the last 3 decades, the huge economic development, huge modernization in China. One argument is that this lead to crisis of trust, right? This should lead to lower trust among Chinese people. But another perspective is linking to that because Chinese people become richer, become more open, become more tolerant, they should become more trusting in each other. And then the data, when I look into the data, into the survey data, I pulled together all the survey data, it shows indeed that there's stable, high trust among Chinese. And then when we focus on people's trust in strangers, even though Chinese people do have low trust in strangers, but the data shows over time, Chinese people even become more trust in strangers. So that's another debate about crisis debate, whether modernization lead to lower or higher trust. And the final debate is thinking about where does trust come from, right? So when we think about trust matters, trust is critical to a political governance, to economic growth, to individual health and happiness. Where does trust come from? Essentially, there are 3 kind of theories. One line of theory is that trust is genetic, right? People are trusting because it's a function of genetic makeup. And then if you read into some medical research and also some social science research, they have very good data that looking into how genes related to people's trusting each other. Last year, one of my friends from Sweden, he used data from the big data from Denmark. In Denmark, when people were born, they were assigned a number, and that number, that ID, is the ID for this person's whole life, right? So then he used certain type of data that when people go to donate blood, and then they can find the data, have that genetic genes data. So he was able to do a survey about people in Denmark and link to their genes data. And then what he found is that the people's genes can explain about 15% of the variation in trust. And then there was other research report similar kind of findings that people trusting each other has something to do with genetic makeup. Two other theory, one is cultural, right? So people argue that when some people are more trusting other people, is because they were socialized into higher trust, right? So people learn to trust in each other from early on in life, right? When they have good relationship within the family, right? When they within the school settings or within the neighborhood where they grow up, right? So when in a neighborhood, when people are trusting each other, people will grow up in that kind of environment. They later life they become more trusting, right? And then this type of trust is, and especially stabilized early in life, right? So my dissertation research, which Cary was one of the committee members, I also look into like how the early life socialization matters for people's trusting each other. So one way I did to kind of test the cultural factor is using migration as a way to test the cultural argument. So for example, in the US, in the United States, people from the southern United States, they tend to have lower trust if you ask the standard survey question, right? So if you, from the GSS, if you ask, do you think most people can be trusted? In southern United States, about 30% would say people can be trusted. But in Chicago, in New York, more than 40% people would say most people can be trusted. So you see that Americans from the northern part are more trusting than people from the southern United States. And the gap has been consistent over the years, right? The gap is like, you can see the gap using like 60 years of data from the GSS. People in the South always have lower trust than people in Chicago and in New York, right? So my research are looking into if people were born in the southern United States and then they migrate to Chicago, to New York, for example, coming to Chicago, to New York to study, do they become more trusting, right? They from a low trust place, but they migrate come to Chicago where people are relatively more trusting. Do they become more trusting, right? So the key pattern is that if they came to Chicago after age 16, they do not become more trusting. Only if they migrate to Chicago and New York early in life, for example, at age 5 with their parents, under age 16, then they will become more trusting. They will be as trust as local Chicagoans, right? So based on that evidence, I suggest that the early life socialization, where people grow up, really matters a lot for people's trust later in life, how they think about others, and do they trust in other people, right? So then that's another kind of like the cultural explanation. This is related to the another theory about trust, experiential, right? So this argument about people trusting or not trusting is a reflection of daily contemporary experience, right? So meaning that if you go out and then you got like, for example, you got attacked on the street today, or you got robbed, or you just experienced certain like victimization or negative experience, and this daily contemporary, or you lost job, you got divorced, right? So those kind of daily contemporary experience could destroy people's trust in each other too, right? So this is another kind of experiential theory. That also like the evidence showing, yes, this kind of like everyday experience do affect people's trust in each other, but this effect is short term, only short term, right? So for example, if you lost job, you will become less trusting, but only in like a few months. Next month or next year, your trust will recover, will always regress to the mean, right? So the one research using panel data, a British household panel, like following people in UK over long time at individual level, the panel data. And then what they found is that there's some fluctuation in people's trust, but their trust always go back to the mean level over time, right? So in that sense, people's trust do kind of tend to be stable over the life course, meaning that if you are trusting, you have this level of trust, and your level of trust will be stabilized after age 16, right? No matter what happened in your life, right? So essentially, those are a third debate about where does trust come from. So looking into in Chinese context, what I found is that people do have a lot of trust in each other. One reason is about perceived fairness. So in China, even though there's a lot of inequality, but Chinese inequality is very different from American inequality. Chinese inequality is more on regional base, right? So we see a lot of like differences in terms of income and life quality. But in China, those differences are based on like urban rural or Western China, Central China, or like Southern China, right? Northern China. So those are regional or place-based differences. But in the US, differences in income and in quality of life are often social group based, right? So in the US, for example, it's between black and white, Asian and black, white, and then like immigrants and not immigrants, gender, men and women. So social groups. So inequality in the US is more based on social groups. Inequality in China is more based on regions and place. So, and those differences matters. So if you ask people in China, do they perceive a lot of inequality? People from certain part of China, because it's place-based, people live among them are very similar to them. So they do not perceive high inequality, even though based on Gini coefficient, because the Gini did not take into account the place-based differences, only as a country level. China's inequality is as high as Americans' Gini, right? But people, they do not perceive high inequality in China. And then if they don't see inequality, they tend to have more trust in other people. So that's one kind of key driver, key factor why people in China is trusting. Another factor is trust in political institutions, right? In China, people have a lot of trust in political institutions, especially in central China, central government. People have much more trust in the Beijing government and central national government than the local community. But in the US, it's the opposite. People have more trust in local community level government, but they have much lower trust in federal level government, for example, Washington government, right? So that because in China, people even in local political government, Chinese have higher faith and trust in political institutions than people in the US, and then that high political trust lead to a higher social trust. So thinking about where that trust come from in China, in that research I suggest is about perceived inequality and then also political institutions. I think I will stop here. Just like a very quick overview about social trust in the three kind of key debate in Chinese context.
That was terrific as an overview of a decade or more of work that he has been reading. And one of the earlier ones I'll just mention was in one summer, he found about 50 plus papers on Chinese trust of all kinds of methods, ethnographies, experiments, and so forth. And the first reaction in many is that, oh, the sense of an authoritarian government will lead people to say they must trust the government. But that was an immediate thing which was refuted by studying Chinese living in Canada, living in Europe, and so forth. And they did not change when they moved in that way, in the way that Cary discussed in the case of moving from the American South to the North. So these kinds of things are subtle, and the simple refutations were refuted in ways that what you've heard is a wonderful multi-causal, multi-factor, and then he has found the evidence multi-method, which is documented, and he gave you numbers like 15%. He didn't show you, but glance at if you haven't. And Cary, if you want to put a briefly want to put one of your tables or two from the Chinese GSS, just to show those different institutions that in China which document what you said orally, that it's a very powerful illustration. But in the meantime, who else has questions, comments?
Yeah, just as far as like the varying levels of regional trust, both in the United States and China, I think you mentioned inequality as a factor for China, but for the United States, did you stumble across any potential explanations as far as like why people in the South are less trusting than those in the North, specifically big cities? Like, is it something politically motivated or what? Because it sort of contrasts with the sort of whole like reputation of Southern hospitality or what have you. So do you have any reasons for why that might be?
So yes, there are a lot of like theories were proposed trying to explain why people in the South tend to have lower trust. One theory is about population makeup as demography. Is that in the U.S. Blacks tend to have lower trust. So in the survey, if you ask in social trust, if you ask Blacks, do you think most people can be trusted, and tend to have lower trust? And then in the Southern United States, maybe that reflects kind of the population makeup. But even controlling the race, for example, Blacks in the South tend to have lower trust than Black in Chicago, right? So in that sense, population makeup is not a good theory. And second is about religious belief, right? A lot of research linking to people's religious belief and how that linked to people's trust, right? So more in-group religious connection more then lead to lower trust in people in general, right? Because that higher in-group trust lead to lower out-group trust. So that's another kind of theory. A third theory is really it's about the people argue. It's about the radius of trust. That's I didn't mention is also people use that theory to explain high trust in China. So the idea is that when people think about, do you think most people can be trusted? And when people think about most people, Americans in the South, they think about most people in a more narrow sense, like family groups, and then like in general, that rate, the lower or higher radius of trust, thinking like how people think about most people can have impact on their trust in each other. If they think about most people as like people they don't know, strangers, and then they will have lower trust. If they think of most people as like people they do know, and they in their own group, then they have higher trust. So the idea was proposed by again the Francis Fukuyama, and then he also used this theory to try to explain why in China trust is high. His argument is that when people were asked about most people in Chinese context, people were thinking about most people as people they do know, their family members, the people they have contact with. Therefore, they will respond in a more positive sense that most people can be trusted. So there's also other theory that in terms of regional differences in the US, but then inequality and also socioeconomic status or the development, the stage of development at place level is also associated with high or low trust. So globally, for example, we will see that more democratic places and then places are richer, like higher GDP, tend to have higher trust. The more developed places have higher trust. So that could also part of the reason in terms of regional differences in trust in the US, but also other places, in China too, and in Canada too. In Canada, we will see that there are huge gap between Quebec and the rest of Canada, between like French Canadians and English Canadians. French Canadians tend to have much lower trust than English Canadians. And then people also trying to figure out why. Like one reason is about like one idea is theory people propose is about religious. So that people in Quebec tend to dominate by Roman Catholic religious belief, but English Canadians have different less. So then that religious differences, and then also the segregation and diversity, right? So a lot of people argue that diversity is good, but in trust research, people find evidence that more diverse places, people tend to have lower trust, right? So then people try to make sense why in more diverse places, people tend to have lower trust, because when people from different backgrounds, they're more like they don't know each other, they don't understand each other because of the cultural ethnic backgrounds, and that lead to using partners words at least a short term diversity will lead to lower trust, right? So a short term, and then he argued that long term, right, when diversity become a norm, right, people know each other, communicate with each other more from different backgrounds, then diversity eventually will lead to higher trust, right? But at short term, he mentioned that diversity will lead to lower trust. In Europe, in Canada, and also in US, a lot of research documenting that more diverse places, people tend to have lower trust.
Excellent. Anyone else have a comment or question? Cary, anything you want to raise or mention how this relates to your more general work on comparing? That is, you've done also, I'll mention just for at least two of you, you've done many studies trying to compare China internationally and systematically, both with general theory from Max Weber, but also down to many things which you've analyzed with surveys and other sorts of data. And you've joined these together. So any thoughts on doing that? You spent last summer touring China, talking to the Chinese researchers, and any advice on that?
Yes, last summer I did go back to China and went visit quite a few cities in China. And then one thing I still haven't get the chance to really write more about that is about how to think about in urban places, like in China, urban places are very crowded, right? So you see lots of people, right? And then oftentimes we perceive like crowded place as a negative, like because lots of people are very crowded as a negative thing, right? So, but based on like my kind of field work, I'm reading into the literature, like thinking more is like how this crowded places could lead to good outcomes, the positive aspect of being crowded, right? In terms of people relationship, and also in terms of economic growth, urban development, right? When being like a crowded place could produce positive outcomes, right? So one thing to think about from people's perspective, right? So they in China, especially recent years, a lot of real estate development, and because of the land, a lot of like the development is like was located outside of the city center, right? There are a lot of like tall buildings being built, but you now because of decline of real estate, you see all those houses empty. Nobody want to live in a suburban, very different from US, right? Like in the US, like very few people really want to live in urban downtown Chicago. But many like rich, especially rich Americans, they will prefer to live in the suburb and quiet rural places. But in China, it's the opposite. They did develop a lot of buildings, communities outside of the city. But because of this, the economic downturn in China, all those tall buildings become empty, right? The one reason, if you ask, even though it's very much cheaper to live in outside of the city, right? And for a lot of like low income, middle income Chinese, they can only afford those outside of city kind of like housing, right? But they don't go there, even though they are cheaper. And the one reason I asked, and what they told me is that they want people to be around, like they want to see people, they want to be in a crowded environment, right? So they want to see the peopleness, right? So that's kind of like something very very interesting. And another aspect about urban development or modernization or economic growth over the last 3 decades about China is a lot of people are trying to explain the like turn it into a like Asian miracle or Chinese miracle, right? So why at the institutional level, trying to figure out why as a non-democratic authoritarian regime can lead to high level growth. Right? A lot of people thinking about trying to figure out the institutional theory, trying to explain in that aspect. But then fewer scholars looking into people, like people is like people city, people is the explanation, right? People meaning that who are they, what they do, right? And how they live their life. The people explanation, right? So I think a direction to go is really focus on people, like how they live their life, how they live, what about Chinese people that lead to the economic development over the last 3 decades. That's something that I'm very interested in thinking about. Maybe they're trusting each other. Maybe they want to live together among each other, right? And then that kind of like being crowded, being to live among each other, and that lead to like I think in urban research they talk about the people get together, lead to a lot of ideas, a lot of like jobs, a lot of like consumption, right? So that's linked back to what Cary has done over like his career, really demonstrating like how people-centered things or cultural or consumption, neighborhood, all those like social place level factors, not about like human capital, but more about those social capital, cultural capital that lead to urban growth in China, economic development in general, right? But in that sense, there's a few kind of theoretical development trying to explain the urban economic growth development in China.
Cary, if you would be able, our time is short enough that Anzi Chen has a PowerPoint with a focus on trying to compare the US with China. And if you'd be able to listen and maybe add any comments here or afterward, that would be very, very helpful. Can we let him talk now?
Yes, of course, I will stay in, yeah.
Thank you. Anzi, go ahead.
Okay, sure. I will try to get my screen shared. I have sent the request.
Yes.
Share. Wait, it's my sorry, it's kind of messed up. Let me try to share my my browser.
There we go.
Okay. Wait, is this still there?
Yes, part one, scene theory.
I kind of have to go back to the beginning. Sorry, just another minute. Wait, where is it?
This is Docs Google. Click to exit full screen. So you're in full screen.
It takes longer than I expected.
This now says, can you see it? Part one, introduction and background.
Yeah, I can see it. And when we went to parks during the
Yes.
pandemic, what do we really care about?
Yes.
I'll just
It's
click oh. Huh. Sorry, I'm so new to this. Okay, here we go. I think it's working now.
When we went to parks during the pandemic, what do we really care about?
Yeah. So basically, this is my master thesis. I plan not to do a comparison, a global comparison at the current stage. But if time allowed, I will continue to do it during my PhD in Columbia University. So, and also for those of you who are not really familiar with the computational social science and how to apply computational social science in social science research, I think it's a really good opportunity for you guys to learn like what it is. So the title of my master's thesis is that when we went to parks during the pandemic, what do we really care about? Before the presentation, I should also notice that this paper is I collaborated with Professor Higahiro Oishi from Department of Psychology for this project. So and this project was done before I know Professor Terry Clark. So probably not a lot of things here is involved in this paper. May I continue?
Please do.
Sure. So a brief introduction and the background for this project. So during the pandemics, the visiting patterns shift significantly compared with those before and after the pandemic. And we kind of want to know why that happened. Specifically, we want to know the following factors, whether the change of the environments before, after, and during the pandemic, or the change of visitors' experience, or the change of socioeconomic conditions contributed to the shifting visiting patterns for all urban parks in US. And this is my hypothesis, which is kind of related to psychology, but not necessarily sociology in this case. So people go to parks to fulfill their basic needs that they can not get anywhere else during the pandemic. So what counted as the basic needs actually matters here actually mattered. So this basic needs, trials, views, or the need to socialize with other people that they cannot get anywhere else during the pandemic. So this is the hypothesis. So how it's related to scene theory? My idea is that, so first, parks serve as the social and cultural scenes in this situation. And the second, the scene theory's dimensions in park preference. And the last one is the parks as part of the urban recovery and placemaking. I mean, if we have time, I can go more detailed in this part. And right now, I will just continue. Why this research matters. Right now, a lot of urban studies only cover the limited number of cities, but due to the help of big data, we are able to collect the data from all cities from US. And why this study matters, the second reason is that it interrogates different data sets with really high accuracy. And the scale has never been done by other urban studies before. This is the framework of the study. Sorry for the low resolution. So here we combine three different data sets together. The first one is the DUV monthly pattern data set, which include the monthly the number of visitors, the number of visiting, and the average dwell time of each visitor, and the amount of time that each visitor traveled from another place to an urban park. So this is the information that has been included in the DUV monthly data set. We also utilize the Google Business Reviews as an approximation to visitors' experience and feedback, and the street views as an approximation to the environmental factors of those urban parks. We also include the socioeconomic conditions of the census level socioeconomic conditions data for these parks. And the independent variables, including the visiting counts, the dwell time, and the distance traveled. And the dependent variables are public perception or experience and environmental features and the socioeconomic conditions of these parks. I'll just skip this part. So why the Google Business Reviews can be used as approximation of the user's experience has been widely studied by previous studies. So in this case, we first extract all the urban parks from the DUV monthly pattern data set, and then use these parks as keywords in Google Maps. And then we extract the Google Business Reviews from these parks and map them back to the locations in the DUV monthly pattern data set. Well, this part is just completely computational social science. If you guys are interested, I can do it later, but right now I'll just skip it. So the tools that we use include the BERT topic modeling for topic modeling, and we also fine-tune the BERT model and use the dynamic BERT topic as well. All of them are performed based on Python. And this is the result, shows the different clusters of those topics include like do people really care, like people's feedback on the qualities of the street, the qualities of the environment, like if they feel safe in these parks, or if they are able to talk to other people in these parks, extra. The second computational social science method that we use is the image identification. We train a neural network to identify the percentage of different features within one image extracted from the Google Street Views. Like for example, we are able to identify like how many trees are there in one image, or how many people are there in one image, or like if bike lane existed, or if a trash can existed, extra. So these features will be counted as the environmental features for this study. We're running out of time. I'll just skip this part. Okay, so this is the result of the model. We used the random forest model for this study, so the input features included the environmental features, the visitor's experience, and the socioeconomic conditions. And the output features will be the visiting volume of each park before, during, and after the pandemic, and the average distance that people traveled before, after, and during the pandemic to get to these parks, and the time that they spent in these parks. So this is one of the sample. Well, it's not really a sample. This is one of the results. Like, it shows the travel distance dependence on household types and transportation, which means that the x-axis x-axis reflects the increase of the travel distance, and the y-axis shows the increasing quality of household types and the transportation of each user. As we can tell that as the travel distance increases, the quality of household type and transportation also increases as well. And all year, the data from all 5 different years have the same patterns, no variation. I think we're running out of time, so I'm sorry for the rushed presentation, but this is the end. I really think you guys probably have a lot of questions right now due to the poor quality of presentation.
Questions or comments from anyone? At least you've given us a quick overview that you've done a lot of thoughtful work. Cary, in particular, if you want to lead off with anything, that would be great.
Yes, a very, very interesting topic and research, and also like a very good topic, thinking about exercise, going to work, a park, and how that matters, right? So one big comment like in my mind is that we often think that people go to park because of something at the park. The people go there like attractive. The parks are attractive, and the people want to go there for something, right? So that's like underlying your assumption and trying to figure out. So that's a good thinking, but then also just to remind that a lot of times people do things not because of the park, right? So people go to park or do exercise is because who they are, or are they able to? It's not about like, okay, the park have something to offer, but a lot of times even I want to go to park, but then I can't, or I'm not motivated, or I'm not trusting, right? So something about the individuals could also be like a hidden part of like factors that stop or motivate people go to the park. A lot of times it's not just what the park have to offer. That of course there's something about the park could attract certain type of population, but there's also need to think about like the different population, right? Some people have more time. Other people like during pandemic have to do a lot of jobs. They can't go even they wanted to go, right? Or some people just like you mentioned about safety, that maybe there's gender differences in perception of being safe out there, right? Because maybe women are less perceived lower, like being safe out there, less likely to perception of safety, then they are discouraged to go there. So what I'm trying to say is a lot of times it's not about the park, it's about people, right? So then of course there's a park could be attractive or not attractive to certain population, but then people also matters in that sense. Okay, so I will stop here. Very good, very interesting research, and a very good use of like big data, right? So like because of the computer power and also because of the Google like data, images, like and how to like mine the data and how you really make use of like the big good data to do research is really as a great a way to highlight like social science research.
And I'll remind others and myself that your MA was a purely ethnographic survey of organizations and nonprofits across China, leading to an interesting series of reports subsequently. So we're at the end of our time. Thank you to all. We will have a session on campus on Wednesday for a review for the exam, and we can discuss anything else at that point that anyone wants to bring up. So thank you again for Cary, for Anze Chen, and for Bella for sparking our discussion. Thanks to all.
Thank you.
so
Thank
much.
you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, I want to end the recording.